Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at our latest Facebook Live Q&A. My name is Darryl Smalley, and I'm the Executive Member for Culture, Leisure and Communities at City of York Council. Today, we're holding this session as part of York Business Week, which concludes today. I think many of you will know the format of these sessions from previous events, but for those tuning in for the first time, I'll shortly ask the panel to introduce themselves, and then we'll begin to answer the many questions you may have. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by representatives from both the city's universities, Make It York, the LEP, and as well as colleagues from City of York Council. We look forward to discussing your questions, particularly the latest public health advice and how we can best guide the city's economic recovery from the pandemic. Before I go around and ask the panelists to introduce themselves, I'd just like to touch on a key number of topics from the past week. Of course, York remains within the national lockdown, and it's worth saying that thanks to the efforts of local residents and businesses here in York, the rate of infection in our city has significantly decreased, with York's 7-day rate of new COVID-19 cases dropping well below regional and national averages. Nonetheless, we must not be complacent. We know this has been a very difficult year for everyone, but it is vital that we continue to follow the latest public health advice to stop the spread of the virus. Despite the restrictions, many of the council services are continuing throughout November, including the city's parks, public toilets and household waste and recycling centres, which all remain open to local residents. I'd just like to repeat that should anyone need support, please do call the helpline on York 551 550 or email covid19help@york.gov.uk, and the council and its thousands of volunteers will do everything we can to help. Now I'll stop speaking at this stage and ask our panel to introduce ourselves. I know everyone on Zoom looks slightly different to everyone else, so I'll go round as it is on my screen. So Andrew, would you mind introducing yourself?
Councillor Andrew Waller, Executive Member for Economy and Strategic Planning.
Thank you, Andrew. Sharon?
Hi everyone, I'm Sharon Stoltz, Director of Public Health.
Sean?
Good afternoon everybody, I'm Sean Bullick, Managing Director of Make It York.
Thank you. Karen?
Good afternoon, Professor Karen Bryan, Vice Chancellor, York St John University.
Thank you, Karen. And Charlie?
Charlie Jeffery, Vice Chancellor, University of York.
Thank you, Charlie. James? Are you there, James? We might be struggling with James a little bit, but we'll try and get him back. I can tell you that James is from York and North Yorkshire Local Enterprise Partnership. And Neil?
Hi, Neil Ferris. I'm the Corporate Director for Economy and Place, working at the City of York Council.
Thank you ever so much, Neil. So we'll get on then, and we'll try and bring James back in if he's not managed to rejoin us. Thank you, everyone. We have a number of pre-submitted questions, and I'd like to think we've had lots in advance, as we always do for these sessions. And we will begin by answering those questions, but please do post your comments and questions in the comment section, and we've got several comms officers helping behind the scenes who will help us answer those questions live as we go through the session. So first, I think it's been in the news quite a bit. We've got a question for Sharon, which is York putting in a bid for mass testing? Over to you, Sharon.
Yes, thank you for that question. I'm getting a message flag up to say my internet connection is unstable, but hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So yes, where we are with, so when we talk about mass testing within this context, what we're really talking about is the new lateral flow devices, which give a much quicker result. So you get a result within 30 minutes to an hour after the test has been done. And there's been a lot of publicity about this nationally and locally. So all directors of public health on behalf of their local authority has been asked to submit expressions of interest to introduce these new lateral flow tests in their area. York is planning to submit an expression of interest, which has to be approved by the Department of Health and Social Care. And we're drawing up those plans now. They will be discussed at the Outbreak Management Advisory Board next week, and dependent on the discussion at the board and the decisions of the board, we will be submitting our proposals to Department of Health and Social Care. We will then have to wait to find out if our proposal has been accepted, and then we can plan to roll out those tests. It is important, though, to make clear that the existing tests for people that have symptoms of coronavirus are still available. So the new lateral flow tests are for asymptomatic people. It's to try and find out those people who may be carrying the virus in the community but are not experiencing symptoms. So asymptomatic people. The people who have symptoms of coronavirus will be asked to book a test in the same way that they do now, either by going onto the government website or by calling 119, and that won't change even when we introduce the lateral flow devices. So we will continue to keep residents updated with progress as that develops.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I think just because we're on the subject of testing, we have had a question which is about how universities are accessing mass testing. I don't know if you might want to pick on that, Sharon, first, but I don't know if Charlie or Karen wanted to talk about testing at universities.
I'll leave Charlie and Karen first, and then I can jump in and add anything extra.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sharon. So Charlie and Karen, which Charlie, would you like to go first? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darryl. Universities in England were all notified over last weekend that they were welcome to express interest in a similar scheme focused on universities for these lateral flow device tests, which are high volume, quick turnaround. They look a bit like a pregnancy test. We have expressed interest in that. We're getting more information from government about how this would work. We don't have an answer yet, but we're hopeful that we will be able to deploy that testing capability, in part to support the movement of students returning to their family homes for Christmas, and to give reassurance about their status vis-a-vis the virus. And as this system rolls out, it will be very valuable in managing that risk again in January when students return. I should also say that we're working with NHS partners in York and Hull, the universities in York and in Hull, to access a different kind of mass testing scheme. We have expressed our interest in that, and that's looking good as well. And so with those capabilities, and with the local authority capability that Sharon was talking about, I think we'll be in a good situation to compare and share resources across our various institutions to make sure we are as well equipped in this city as we can be to help manage transmission risks of the virus.
And thank you so much, Charlie. Karen, would you like to add anything?
Thank you. Yes, I can confirm that York St John University has also put in an expression of interest to have lateral flow testing, and we'll be using it in a very similar way to the way that Charlie outlined. We are also part of the LAMP test initiative, so I think it's very positive that, working really closely with Public Health England, the universities will be able to be part of that test infrastructure for the City of York. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just checking, Sharon, did you want to come in on anything here? Yes, go for it.
Just to clarify that it's the council public health team, not Public Health England, that's been supporting this, but obviously Public Health England has an interest as well. I just wanted to add that the other dimension to testing is GP practices. So GP practices are also now going to be able to request swabs. That's the PCR route, which is laboratory testing route. For any of their patients that require testing. So part of the discussion on Wednesday at the Outbreak Management Advisory Board will be how we pull all of these different strands together. As we've already discussed, this is very much a whole city approach. It's fantastic now that York has access to all of these testing capabilities. We've been lobbying for improved access to testing for months now. And so it's great that we now have all of this available. But because it's happening in different parts of the city, we need to pull it all together. And the Outbreak Management Advisory Board has a key role in providing assurance to residents and businesses, etc., locally that as a city we're working together. So that's a live meeting on Wednesday. So if anybody wants to watch and listen in to that discussion at the Outbreak Management Advisory Board, please do so. Thanks, Darryl.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And I'm sure whilst we'll go on to other questions, I'm almost certain we'll end up somewhere back at the public health response, given the topic of today's session. Next on to a question that was submitted in advance. Martin asked, with the opportunity for a greener recovery in mind, can we pledge to provide a truly sustainable, fully interconnected and attractively priced network of public transport on trains, buses and bicycles as a top priority for York residents, those visiting York and York's businesses? I don't know who, Neil, Sean, Andrew, who would like to kick us off on this point? I know it's a very big matter. Neil, I'll go to you.
Just kick off. Obviously, in response to the COVID crisis, the city's put together a one-year transport plan, but it's effectively making sure that whilst we maximise the amount of space within the city centre for people to socially distance, and we take advantage of the lower traffic on the road system. So what we've done this year, we've launched the e-scooter, e-bikes in York just back in September. We've effectively put in those extended foot streets, as I've suggested. Coppergate has become one way for buses, which enhances the amount of pavement available for people. And we've put trial schemes in on Castle Mills Bridge, which is now moved away following the summer. And we're doing a piece up at the Groves as well. So we've used some of that emergency active travel funding from central government to actually, as the caller has asked for, sustainable long-term solutions for the city. I can also announce that today we've just had a notification. We've received £658,000 for the Emergency Active Travel Fund Part 2. And obviously there's some exciting proposals again for sustainable transport to be feature as part of the city's highway road improvements. And obviously one of the requirements of that is that there's full consultation for those people who will be impacted. So again, watch this space for those consultations for more sustainable transport coming your way.
Thank you so much, Neil. I know the residents of Rawcliffe are looking forward to the improvements to Shipton Road that I know were flagged as part of the ATF too. So it's great that the city's got that investment. Sean.
Thank you, Darryl. Yes, I was just going to make a couple of points really further to Neil's contribution there. I think the first, which is obviously extremely topical, is York Central. So as we all know, it received its planning permission last night, and it's a hugely important development for the city, absolutely transformational. I think with respect to green and sustainable issues, I think there is an opportunity for it to be an absolute national and international exemplar in terms both of its design and in terms of the sort of businesses that that we install there, and the sort of focus they would have, bioeconomy and that sort of thing. So I think that's hugely important in itself. Beyond that, I think with respect to the wider city, clearly we, like everywhere else, face all sorts of environmental challenges, and I think ultimately, and I'm not in charge of policy, so so I won't be making these decisions, but ultimately I think we'll end up with a car-free city centre, and that will of course require, in order to ensure access, a comprehensive public transport, an environmentally friendly public transport system. So I think that's one of the issues for us all to consider in the coming years. And certainly as Neil talks about 10-year strategies, I think that's very much part of what we'll be thinking about.
Thank you very much, Sean. Andrew, do you want
to? Thank you. As a keen cyclist, I've noticed more people out and about, and I think the way in which some of the routes can be improved for people who have just switched to cycling, who aren't the hardened cyclists, but actually with the right situation would switch. And before COVID, it was noticeable the difference between school holidays and non-school holidays with the ease to get around the city, and therefore we recognise that many journeys will still continue to be made by motor vehicle, but very noticeable that organisations like Northern Power Grid are looking during this time to how the connection to the grid for local generation of power at the same time as people switching to electric vehicles, the infrastructure can cope with that. So I think there are some very positive steps being taken in strategic infrastructure, and I think there's more looking forward to a situation where active travel is actively supported so that people can support their local shops and services, but also looking at those journeys that still need to be made by a vehicle, but making that a more benign form of transport.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Yes, I happen to be a keen cyclist or passenger, given I've never passed my test or taken it yet. So yes, I'll pretend it's by choice. We've got a question. You talk about infrastructure there, Andrew, and it probably leads perfectly onto our next question that was submitted in advance. And Will asked, what are the plans to improve digital connectivity and broadband speed in the city centre? As a York resident working from home in the city centre, the broadband speeds have been shockingly low. Working from home is here to stay, even beyond the pandemic. So if the city is to build back better and become a city fit for the future in technological advances, what is the plan to improve broadband speed for homes and businesses? Who would like to? I'll open it. Who would that? Neil, is that a? There we go. We'll go to Neil first, and then to Andrew and anyone else who wants to join in.
Well, I think for Will, just to let him know really that York is in an incredibly advantageous position compared to the rest of the UK. We've got the highest percentage of households that have got access to super fast broadband, and that was described to me as being able to download the whole box set of Lord of the Rings in less than 7 seconds, which is awesome really. And our percentages are up to 60-70% now, and the investment that the private sector, that's ultra fibre optic, Fibre Nation, are looking at and Virgin are putting into the city, so this is private sector money, are looking to take that up to 80 and 90%. Now, in respect to Will's specific piece about the city centre is obviously an ancient core of the city, so that's more difficult for these fibre companies to make that investment in. But the council is working with them on a street-by-street basis to understand what the obstacles to that infrastructure being laid in those streets are. And obviously that's something we're working so that York ends up with 100% coverage. Like I say, we're well ahead of the rest of the country already.
Thank you, Neil. Charlie, would you like to come in, and then I'll go to Andrew.
Thank you very much, Darryl. This is a bit of a plea for our students across the city who are doing a lot of their studying from home, and certainly some of them don't have as effective a Wi-Fi provision as they could. Now, Neil, I recognise this may well depend on the provider and the type of contract and everything like that, and it's not necessarily about the core infrastructure, but it's certainly something which is of concern to us as we work remotely. So I guess I'm saying I would love to be part of the conversations in the city about how we can ensure that all of our citizens have really good access. Thanks.
Thank you, Charlie. I completely agree. Andrew.
Thank you. Yeah, I think to build on that, I have been on a number of calls with businesses around the city, and some have very good connections, others it's more patchy, and I think it's it doesn't detract from the status of York as having good connectivity to recognise there are some not spots or areas for improvement. And it's something that I have asked officers to look at, collecting that information, and Charlie would be delighted to set up a connection so that your information can feed into this, because I think it's a critical thing looking forward to get it right. And amongst the changes that have happened, there's much more opportunity for piggybacking infrastructure. So rather than every provider building their own infrastructure, there's a much greater sharing that can take place, recognizing that in some locations, if you can use the existing BT wires, then why wouldn't you? So I think there's a lot that we can do to correct those areas that need support, whilst not detracting from the overall impression that York is a relatively well-connected city, and it's to our economic.
Thank you, Andrew. And there you go, not just answering questions, but actually coming up with the solutions live on air. And I think as well as when you talk about blind spots, I know speaking to Cherie, who runs Aesthetica, who run that from Coney Street now, and their new offices there. You know, they struggled trying to, when they were preparing for the Short Film Festival, to run it virtually this year with their internet. And I don't know if we're allowed to plug people, but I know they had some infrastructure provided by York Data Services that have meant that now the Aesthetica Film Festival managed to go really, really well, and all online. I'll just going back to our pre-submitted questions. We've had a question from Anelka, and I think we've had live questions on this matter as well, which is, what plans are there in place to ensure disabled people in York are able to support and contribute to the city's economic recovery? And I'll add in there a couple of live questions we've had in terms of making sure that any foot street measures and any car-free measures don't unnecessarily disadvantage disabled people. I feel like we're picking on you slightly, Neil, but you can probably guess. I'll go to you first and then bring other people in. Thank you.
Thank you, Darryl. So obviously from a perspective of the COVID crisis, we've had to take some emergency action over the summer, and that included extending the foot streets, and that emergency action didn't allow us to undertake the level of consultation that we would normally do. But the emergency action was taken to provide more capacity in the foot streets for us all to be get out and about, including disabled people. And we've had a lot of support from disabled people in respect of that additional space. But we reflect upon that emergency action that yes, it has disadvantaged some, and members recognise that back in August, and has set aside funds for officers to engage with that community, and we have done so over the last 3 months, and we reviewed and are reviewing the measures that we put in place alongside those emergency measures, and we reflect that some of those could be improved upon. And I can highlight today that obviously on the 26th of November, the executive will be considering a report on the ongoing emergency measures for the foot streets in the city, but also proposals as to how to take forward some of those extended foot streets on a more permanent basis. We want to strike the balance between making sure that we're a city centre that is accessible for all, and as Sean alluded to earlier, that ambition to have a city centre that is more accessible for people on foot.
Thank you very much. And I know some of the engagement activity that's gone on, I think it's So obviously there've been negatives over the last few months, lots and lots of negatives, but actually one of the good things has been there's been far many more conversations than ever would have happened without this crisis. I know, from the York Disability Rights Forum and many other organisations, I know that just a quick thank you to all of their work in supporting the council in that engagement work. Unless anyone wants to come on, oh, Andrew, do you want to come in on that?
Thanks. I think to build on the comments made, that there is much more dialogue and discussions actively ongoing, because we recognise that in order to provide some of the solutions to keep businesses open in the summer, that did have an impact on blue badge provision, and recognising that as an ageing population, more people are in a situation they're not able-bodied cyclists, and therefore ensuring that there's provision to enable access to all. I think that's a crucial part. And it was unfortunate that the My City Centre programme, which was developing that review of the city centre from the challenges of expanding foot streets whilst not excluding some people, that had not quite reached the point of being launched, and then we were overtaken by the pandemic. So I think it's speeded up that dialogue, recognizing that there are businesses in the city centre that regularly contact me about access and people dropping off sewing machines and the like. So I think there's much greater discussion and much better connectivity.
Thank you very much, Andrew. On to probably sticking with you two. Apologies, everyone else. We've had a question on how and where businesses can apply for the government grants and business support, and what sort of business can apply for grants. This is probably one for Sean, Neil, and Andrew. I don't know who would like to chip in first. There's a rush to. There we go, Andrew. Do you want to go? There you go.
Well, I think the council staff have responded very quickly. It took some time to get the government guidance for the latest grants, and we have all the while been lobbying on behalf of those organisations that were excluded from previous grant systems. The businesses with rateable values over £51,000, some of the supply chain, and recognising that there are self-employed micro businesses that we brought in a specific micro business scheme before, and so that's a whole cohort of people who are a significant part of the York economy that had previously been missed out in government grants. So everything is on the council website, and I would encourage businesses to look at that system. The additional discretionary scheme, we're still putting that together, as are every other local authority, and when that goes live we will announce that, but it's about those businesses that in tier 2 saw a drop off in customers, and therefore they were impacted. And then there's a slightly different set of businesses, the list of which is on the website, who were forced to close by the lockdown. So there's a number of different grant schemes at the moment, but it's taken a lot of time with council officers and with partners to make sure that the system's right, and we will certainly do our best to pay the resources across as quickly.
Thank you, Andrew. Sean.
Thank you, Darryl. James Farrar, the Chief Executive of the LEP, was supposed to be on the call, but I think he's had an internet connection problem. So he's asked me to just highlight, in addition to the points that Andrew has raised about grants, that the LEP and certainly Make It York as well have a range of initiatives which go beyond financial grants, which businesses can access free of charge. So by way of example, and please do look at both the LEP website and the Make It York website, but by way of example, any retail business can get access to a free online trading platform through an app called Shop Happy, which has been funded by the LEP. And again, obviously in circumstances where physical access to retail is limited, that could be hugely important. businesses can, if they can secure a too good to go accreditation, can benefit from reducing their waste by reducing or by selling or other products that would be at risk of being thrown away, which again could be valuable and significant in terms of stock. There are various practical webinars on marketing and various other post-COVID recovery activities. So as I say, please do look at those websites, and if in doubt, get in touch with the LEP or Make It York.
Thank you very much, Sean. Yeah, Neil, do you want to add anything?
Just a final piece. So Councillor Nigel Eyre did a decision session yesterday regarding the discretionary grant money that has been given to City of York Council to distribute to those businesses that cannot directly benefit from the government scheme that is associated with their rateable value. And the councils looked at those industries that have been forced to close down through lockdown and said, well, actually, there are many businesses in their supply chains and or who don't have a premise. So they might be in a premise where somebody else pays the rates. So they've not been previously eligible for grants. So that decision was taken yesterday. That grant arrangements are being put in place quickly now by officers, so those businesses can apply. So please, as Andrew has said, look on the council's website for grants. You might not, you think you're eligible for the national scheme, but please do look, because we have made the decision already on our discretionary grants.
Fantastic, Neil. So thank you so much. If anyone watching has any questions in terms of how the grants work or what specific grants they might be eligible for, then do comment. And if we can't answer it live here today, then the council officers involved in the schemes will be pouring through the questions to make sure you get answers to them quickly. As predicted, going back to public health now, we've had a question which I think you might have briefly touched on, Sharon, in your first statement, but it was, have York's case numbers continued to fall?
Yes, so York is a bit of an island at the moment in relation to neighbouring local authorities, in that their numbers are continuing to go up and ours are falling. So our case rate at the moment for 7 days, which is actually significantly lower than the regional rate, and it's lower than the national rate as well. And our provisional rate, this is based on data that we have access to, that we're waiting to be validated, low still at, that's really good news. In terms of our positivity rate, that's also come down significantly. So when we went into tier 2 about a month ago, our positivity rate, that's the proportion of tests coming back as positive, was 18%. That's now reduced to 10%, which is similar to the national average. Whereas places like Hull, for example, are now over 18%. So York is on a very different trajectory to some of those other areas. We had that early spike. We went into tier 2 and now our numbers are coming down again. However, just to balance that very positive picture, York Hospital is still seeing increased activity. So as of Tuesday, there were 56 patients in general and acute beds with COVID on the York Hospital site, and 5 patients in ITU. They aren't necessarily all York residents, because obviously York Hospital serves a wider geography than just York. So we're keeping an eye on what's happening with hospital admissions. But hopefully, as our numbers continue to fall, I'm sure we'll see some hospital admissions because we know some people can get very sick with COVID, but hopefully we'll be able to keep those numbers down. So as a city, what we're doing is working. Those simple messages around, you know, hands, face, space, self-isolating and booking a test if you have symptoms. Our numbers show that that works. And so I would urge residents, even though I'm sure everyone is fed up of hearing the message, you're fed up with the pandemic, you want life to get back to normal again. We'll get back to normal in York quicker if we can just carry on doing what we're doing, and, you know, hands washing, wearing a face covering, social distancing, those simple measures, so important. They do work. And so I would urge everyone to just carry on obeying those rules, really.
Yeah, thank you ever so much, Sharon. We've just had a quick question on the live comments, just asking, I think you broke up incredibly slightly, just on when you were saying about the R rate, the 7-day average R rate for York, would you mind just repeating that number?
So this is different to the R rate. The R rate tends to be worked out on a larger geography. So the R rate for York is included in the Northeast and Yorkshire calculation. What I was talking about was the prevalence rate, the positivity rate, which is 10% now, just over 10%. So that's a drop from 18% from just.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Sharon. And I hope that answers the question. In terms of moving on, a question probably for Sean, possibly Andrew as well, and possibly Neil. I mean, we've covered the business, the grants, and what's available there. I know Sean touched on it slightly, but beyond the funding that's been announced by government, what support is there out there for small businesses? Who would like to jump in on this first? Sean, do you want to go?
Yeah, as you mentioned, Darryl, I touched on it before. I think, yeah, basically the support falls into two categories. There's the financial support that comes from central and local government, and then there's I suppose, the business the business experience support. So where particularly smaller businesses may have a fantastic offer, may have a fantastic profit, but don't necessarily have the scale to enable them to plan, to market their business, or to, as I mentioned earlier on, to get onto online in terms of sales. There's all sorts of advice that our teams can provide in that regard. So again, as I mentioned earlier, have a look at our website, have a look at the York and North Yorkshire Growth Hub.com website, and there is a remarkable range of support that is free and is potentially very valuable to a lot of businesses out there.
Thank you very much, Sean. We've got Karen, and then I'll go to Andrew. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you very much. York St John University has a programme for its 2020 graduates, which enables a business free of charge to access a graduate for 6 weeks, 25 hours a week, to carry out a project that would help a business. There's no cost to the business, so clearly it's a very good experience for our graduates. All of the graduates also have a coach. So the person to contact about that is Emma Vincent, who is our head of employability, or look on our website. It may be of interest to some businesses. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen. That's a great plug, and hopefully our team can put those links in the chat there for those people that are watching online now. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you. I was at a session last night with the Federation of Small Businesses, and through the grant systems that we've operated in the city, there's been hundreds and hundreds of new members for them. So the session last night was very much about the offers of help that are available to small businesses it's been very telling that there are micro businesses and self-employed people who they've been very focused on the day-to-day, keeping the businesses afloat, and not necessarily having the time to go through all of the rafts of opportunities for support, but they do know themselves what support they need. So it's very much utilising, as Sean's mentioned, the connectivity from the LEP and Make It York, but also the FSB, and the skills team are working very hard to make sure that the resources that central government have provided for apprenticeships, a whole host of retraining opportunities, that full use is made of that, and that we have a weekly bulletin from the council that thousands of businesses have signed up to, and I would encourage more people to sign up for that, because it's everything in one place. It's a relatively small weekly update, but it does cover all of the items that have been mentioned today, so that people can see what's relevant to them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrew. Obviously, this live Q&A is part of York Business Week, and I know a lot of the week has been focused on the recovery and what the recovery in York might look like, and who might be involved. I think I see you've got. I'll go to you, Neil, in a bit, but I think probably after Neil, it might be helpful to touch on, whilst we've got the two vice chancellors here of University of York and York St John University, might be helpful to come to you after Neil in terms of how the two fantastic universities might help York's recovery. Over to you, Neil. I'll go to you first.
Just a quick one to add onto that Federation of Small Businesses piece, that discretionary grant that I talked about, the decision being made yesterday. The council's also agreed to use some of that discretionary funding to bring in a voucher scheme, and we're currently working that up, that will effectively look to provide training and support to businesses so that we can come out of this COVID crisis with hopefully businesses that are set to work better on a digital platform, particularly, as Andrew alluded to, those small businesses who don't have the capacity internally to effectively upskill on IT or prepare for a different way of working. So that's part of that discretionary work that was agreed yesterday.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Neil, for that clarification. So I think we were just about to move on to how the universities might help shape recovery, and it could be anything from, I guess, Karen's brilliant example in terms of helping students with employability through to larger city shaping measures. Charlie, can I go to you first, and then I'll go over to Karen.
Thank you very much, Darryl. By coincidence, Karen and I were in a meeting earlier on with the heads of York College and Bryan College, focusing very, very clearly and directly on how we could coordinate what we do to ensure that we have a very strong skills pipeline through our educational provision to mesh with the needs and the opportunities of the city. We also talked about some of those opportunities, how the city could become a centre of excellence, even more so than it is now, in some of those areas of the economy where future growth is going to be happening. So the biotech sector as applied to the rural economy is one area. Digital creativity, that connection between new technologies and the creative arts and our natural heritage is another. And we were also talking about the potential of the York Central site right next to the station. We heard earlier that it got its planning permission through, which is brilliant, but we've really got to get right what we do there. And one of the ideas that we were talking about in our conversation earlier was to establish a business incubation and acceleration presence there, which would offer a platform for early stage companies to develop their businesses, their products, and to scale up and grow and secure investment. We've been working on that also with Neil and colleagues in the City Council. I think in all of those ways, we have a fantastic opportunity to build on the strengths of our four educational institutions: University of York, York St John, Bryan College and York College, and we're very, very much focused on that task.
Thank you ever so much, Charlie. You seem to have covered quite a lot there in quite a short period of time. Karen, would you like to talk about yours and John?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'd absolutely echo what Charlie has said. It's really important that we work together as a sort of higher and further education sector, and that we're here as part of the city's ecosystem around business development. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Karen. We're almost running out of pre-submitted questions. So if anyone watching does have any questions on any of the matters we've discussed today, or if you just want to surprise us with any fun questions, do go ahead and do just put them live in the just comment live on Facebook, and we'll catch them hopefully. One question we've had is, what emotional health guidance and training is there for employers to help employees through this difficult time? And you may have noticed we've just had to say goodbye to Sean, and thank you to Sean, MD of Make It York, for coming along. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you. A really important question, because, of course, if businesses are going to be successful, it's important that you have healthy staff. And the topic of emotional and mental health and well-being has been a key one throughout this pandemic, really. There are very few people that haven't been impacted in one way or another with their emotional health. So as part of Business Week, there have been a series of health and well-being events put on to support businesses and employees in adapting to new ways of working and dealing with the pressures being faced as a result of COVID-19. And there are a number of resources that are available to individuals and to employers to support this. The communications person supporting this call will be putting some of that information up onto the website. But York CVS also has a very useful directory of mental health support and facilities and sources of support available across the city. So you can go on to the York CVS website to find that. And then York Mind also has a range of resources that are available to support as well. And you can also go on to the City of York website, the coronavirus pages, because again, there's quite a lot of information there as well. So I would encourage people to access those sources of support, and also use your favorite search engine to find what's available online as well, because again, there are a number of really excellent resources that can be downloaded free, that can give businesses useful practical tips that you might want to introduce in your workforce to help to maintain emotional health and well-being through these really difficult times. So lots of resources available, most of them free. So I would encourage businesses to access those resources.
Thank you so much, Sharon. If anyone would like to come in on this point about employees' emotional health and wellbeing, then do signal. I think just another plug as well for Live Well York, which is an absolutely fantastic resource, which tries to be the home of everything good happening in York. So if you do want to look at what goes on, I know a lot. It was previously used for a lot of in-person, be it exercise classes or walks or anything like that. And I know lots of people find it very useful even through lockdown. Probably what would be helpful actually is if we could cover the return of students in January. So once people have left and gone home over the Christmas period, how the return might happen. Obviously, an awful lot of work went into it in September and October, so it'd be good to cover that, and actually as well how the government proposal in terms of students going home at Christmas might work as well. Charlie, would you like to go in on that first, if that's okay?
Thanks very much, Darryl. It is a moment of risk when students have been living in a household with other students in York, go to a family household at home, and then return again in January. And it's crucial that we think hard about that and how to manage it. We're going to be working carefully to sequence departures and arrivals to make sure we don't get too many people clustering at the same moment. But this is something at which this new testing capability will really be able to help us. I think we'll have that in part in place if all goes well for Christmas departures. Probably won't be comprehensive at that point, but it will be able to offer students who may have vulnerable family members at home the reassurance of checking on their COVID status, and if positive, then we'll support them to self-isolate. I think in January, when we're much more likely to have a full capacity in place, we'll be working hard with Sharon and her colleagues and across the educational institutions in the city to make sure we manage those arrivals and deploy those tests so that we can catch any returners with infections at that point, so that we can manage the risk of onward transmission through these testing technologies. That's only going to work if we have good tracing capabilities, and it's great to hear from Sharon's team that the local tracing is now, I think, 85% or better in its success rate. And then the crucial thing is making sure that we support our students, and of course anyone else in the city who needs to self-isolate. I think that's going to be one of our biggest challenges. Lots of students have had to self-isolate already. They may find another period, a real challenge. So we're going to think hard within the university about how to support and encourage our students to complete that, because that's crucial in managing the risk of transmission. But I also think we should look to government to help there as well. Many students need to work to help finance their studies. If they're having to have periods of self-isolation, they can't. And that's one of the things that could cause some of that self-isolation discipline to fray. So we really want to see, and we've written to the Higher Education Minister on this, an element of government support to make sure that no students suffer financially through having to self-isolate.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Karen, would you like to come in?
Thank you. As Charlie said, we're working very hard across York, across the institutions, to manage the students leaving. They don't all leave at the same time. For York St John University, the last 3 days of our term, which is a little later than University of York, will be online to ensure that the students can leave in the suggested travel window. And we are working also with the council to ensure that public transport will help to facilitate that. Again, the testing hopefully will be available for any student who's concerned about their COVID status as they go home. I think it is important to acknowledge that students in York from all institutions have been very supportive of us in self-isolating when we've asked them to do so. That's been disruptive for them. For some of them, it's been personally difficult, but they really have done what we've asked them to do. And we can see that in the falling rates in all of the institutions, that we all now have very low rates. So I completely agree with Charlie that we need to be thinking about how we can support the students as much as possible if they have to undergo any further isolation in January. But I think it's a positive picture and another good example of how effective it is when the institutions work together along with the City Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more. Karen, Charlie, would you like to come back in there? Is that another?
Just a quick addendum. Not all of our students will go home for Christmas. We have a number of care experienced students who have no other home. We have international students who won't be able to travel. We will have others who will simply choose to stay in York, and we shouldn't forget them either. They will be part of our community over that whole period. We don't know quite what the conditions are in which they'll experience Christmas. We presume we go back to the tier system and back to tier 2 with all the restrictions that go with it. I just wanted to say we haven't forgotten those students, and we'll be working to support them over that period as best we can as well.
Thank you, Charlie. Important not to forget those students still here, and we'll try and do, I know, all of our institutions as much as possible to make Christmas still feel a little Christmassy. And I know the lights went on yesterday, and the city already looks much better for it. Just before we wrap up, we've had a question from Kirsty about what alternative education provision there is available for people aged 16 to 24 to enter work. And then another, I guess if we could link that into apprenticeships and the Kickstart scheme. I know we're slightly short on time, but Andrew, do you want to go first on that point?
Yes, just to cover that, because obviously there's a whole wide range of inclusion that we want to see in the city. The traineeships, apprenticeships, and of course, apprenticeships covers a wider age range than it used to. And that's an opportunity with the transfer of levy to make sure that all of that remains in the city and it's used by large companies to pass on to their supply chain. The Kickstart funding is an incentive, and that's an additional fund. So there was a lot of discussion earlier this week in Business Week on how all of these mesh together to enable companies to provide that opportunity for learning on the job, and so that will be included on the website. I'll make sure that follows, because I appreciate there isn't a huge amount of time. There's the redundancy support service for apprenticeships as well. So there's quite a few announcements from government that we just need to connect with the city and make sure that everyone's aware of what's available.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Neil, did you want to come in on that point at all?
Just to say from what we are doing, and it picks up a bit on the work that Charlie's doing, the City Council in terms of the skills board, he's created a skills board. That skills board is working with the major educational institutions and business. And we're trying to make that, and I think what's, one of the silver linings of this crisis is it's brought everybody together in a coherent effort to recognise that we've got to come out of the back of this better than we went into it. And part of that is making sure that we connect those education providers with business, so that we make sure that we deliver what business wants. And we've started some of that work with, in particular, for a session with the rail industry, because as Charlie's talked about, there's a huge demand for digital skills. So both in the bioeconomy, but also we've got to remember that there's plenty of very successful industries in the city that haven't been impacted by COVID, but have got skills shortages. So digital in rail is something that we're looking at. So just in addition to what Andrew had said.
Thank you so much. With that, and with an eye on time, where we've only got 3 minutes to go, I will start to wrap up. I think I'd just like to say, firstly, thank you to everyone who's asked a question, to the many questions that were submitted in advance, and to those that were asked live. And if you have just asked a question and we've not had time to get to it, then our communications officers will try as best as they can to answer your questions. And if you feel it's still not answered, then I'm sure we'll have more of these live Q&As in the future. So do keep an eye out for them, and they'll be on many other important subjects over the coming weeks. I'd like to thank our panelists for giving their time and insight this afternoon. In particular, thank you to Charlie and Karen, because I think we all have to be here. I think it's somewhere in the local government rule book, but actually, you give up your time and your expertise to come here and talk to us and answer questions. So thank you ever so much to the both of you. Thanks, Charlie. And thank you to Sharon, Neil and Andrew, and thank you to Sean of Make It York, who joined us for 3/4 of the session. And thank you and apologies to James, who joined us very briefly, but sadly the internet connection didn't hold up. I'm sure James will come back on another Q&A at some point soon in the future. If you do have views and comments on the issues we've discussed this evening, do also share your views as part of our big conversation, as this will help develop the Council's approach to some of the big challenges we face, and you can find that very easily on the Council's website. And as I've said, please do feel free to continue leaving comments and questions in the chat and comment section, and we will get back to you. Thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon, and I hope you have a great evening, a great rest of the day, and a good weekend. Thank you very much.